Now, Russia's security service says 8 people have been arrested over last week's explosion that damaged the Kerch Bridge. The blast destroyed a section of the bridge that links Crimea to the Russian mainland. 5 Russians and 3 Ukrainian and Armenian citizens have been detained. Russia's Federal Security Service have also confirmed that the blast was organized by Ukraine's military intelligence service. However, Kyiv has not officially said whether it was involved.
Now, John Cookson is going to join us now from London to get more insight on this. Good day, John, and straight into it. What are we likely to hear from NATO at this meeting in Brussels?
Hi guys, great to be on Newsday. I've been monitoring the live feed out of Brussels very carefully. This morning, US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin just sat down a few minutes ago. He praised the courage of the leadership of Ukraine. He noted that America had given already $600 billion in military aid to Ukraine, but promised that America would stay with Ukraine for what he called the long haul. And that message we will hear over and over again today, repeated by Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, who's now conducting the meeting to talk about how NATO can help Ukraine even further. Now, as I said in my report, what Ukraine desperately needs are more air defense systems, and they've been promised, and the first one has arrived from Germany. The ones promised by the US have not arrived yet. There is, for the Ukrainians, a terrible delay here that they're saying, look, how many more people are going to die before we get these defense systems in place. And once they've got them, that's not the story over, because the Ukrainians then have to be trained in the use of these defense systems, which are extremely sophisticated. And as I noted yesterday when we were talking, training for use of these new systems, which are trickling into Ukraine now, will take at least until March of next year, which is a heck of a long time in this particular conflict. So for the rest of the day and tomorrow, we'll hear more words of support from Ukraine. But what Ukraine desperately needs is action. They need that equipment, and they need it now.
Indeed. Now, John, why is NATO apparently struggling to give Ukraine what it needs?
Well, in a word, NATO countries, including those especially in Europe, are struggling financially on the domestic front. The UK economy teetering on the brink of recession. America too, not in recession, but almost fell into recession. And it's the same story across Europe. Germany, for example. Now, under the terms of NATO, the NATO countries are supposed to commit at least 2% of gross domestic product to NATO. Few of them do. UK does, and UK is in fact promised 3%. But the big problem is the money, and the winter that we all face in Europe with reduction in gas supplies, and this of course all goes back to the conflict itself. One of those defense systems costs around $500,000 each, and Ukraine needs hundreds of these. So you can see how much money is involved. It's billions and billions of dollars, which frankly many NATO countries just don't have to spare at the moment.
Right. Now, while all this is happening, of course, the attacks continue on Ukraine. What is the latest news out of Ukraine today?
Well, sad news from Donetsk. You mentioned it briefly in the intro that apparently Russian rocket has hit a central market in the town of Avdiivka, leaving at least 7 dead and dozens injured. And of course, this is yet another attack on civilians, which in strict terms is a war crime. So we're waiting for further news on that. And throughout the day, there have been air raid sirens sounding across Ukraine, in Lviv, in Kyiv, and elsewhere, but no massive strikes that we heard and saw on Monday. but the intensity of this Russian campaign seems to be unrelenting at the moment. The other development you mentioned briefly in the introduction about the attack on the Kerch Bridge and the 8 arrests. There were 5 Russians arrested, a couple of Ukrainians and an Armenian. And what the Russians are saying is, because no one quite knows why the bridge exploded. Was it a bomb attack or was it a missile? The Russians are saying that the explosives used in this attack were shipped out of Odessa in Ukraine and eventually arrived into Armenia, where they crossed the border with Georgian plates, on a truck with Georgian plates into Russia. So it seems that a number of Russians were actually involved in the procurement of the explosives that led to the explosion, the dramatic explosion on the bridge. So interesting detail emerging there.
Indeed. Arise Chief Correspondent John Cookson, thank you so much for joining us on Newsday. We appreciate your time and analysis as always.